There's a new article out in the New Republic which summarizes the work of a lot of other publications as well, Financial Times, New York Times, etc., as you'll see in a second. It is about Donald Trump's connection to Russian money laundering. So it is not necessarily about what happened in this election. It gives you background on how long Trump has been dealing with the Russians and to what extent, and what illicit activities happened in his towers, connected to his businesses. So Craig Unger, who wrote the article, says, look, there's no smoking gun right now. And so hence a lot of people defending Trump will go, okay, well that's it then, none of it matters at all. Now, listen, watch the whole thing, and if you think it doesn't matter, okay, that's fine. But understand that it is very unlikely that at any point from 1987 when Donald Trump started working with the Russians to now, that Donald Trump would write an email, let alone an email that we could discover right now without the help of prosecutors who are working on it, where he would say, oh, by the way, I will allow Russian mobsters to launder money through my casinos and hotels. That smoking gun is an unlikely event. So the way you put together a case is by looking at the context, the totality, and yes, you have to look at circumstantial evidence, okay? Circumstantial evidence doesn't mean that it's not evidence. That's why the word evidence is in the phrase. It just means that there isn't something direct telling you, I, Donald Trump, did do these shady deals. So you judge for yourself. Let's dive into it and see what you think. Unger explains, even without an investigation by Congress or a special prosecutor, there's much we already know about the president's debt to Russia. Well, that's interesting. Let's find out about it. A review of public record reveals a clear and disturbing pattern. Trump owes much of his business success, and by extension his presidency, to a flow of highly suspicious money from Russia. Now we're gonna give you details on that. You don't have to take his word for it. Over the past 3 decades, at least 13 people with known or alleged links to Russian mobsters or oligarchs have owned, lived in, and even run criminal activities out of Trump Tower and other Trump properties. Now if you say, look, 13 guys with links to Russian mobsters happen to be in some of his properties, he's got a lot of properties, I'm not sure that that's enough. Well, if it was 1 or 2, that'd obviously be a coincidence. 13 seems pretty high. Hold, it's actually dozens of Russian alleged links to Russian mobsters that are all over his properties. Those are just the 13 that we know for a fact were brought up on charges. Okay, so now let's go through more of this. Many used his apartments and casinos to launder untold millions in dirty money. Others provided Trump with lucrative branding deals that required no investment on his part. Well, that seems curious, doesn't it? Do people just come up to you and give you free money for no reason at all? Unless, of course, you're doing something for them. A prosecutor from the Reagan days, this has been going on a long time, Kenneth McCallion, former assistant US attorney, again, for deeply Republican Ronald Reagan, said about the Russians, quote, they saved his bacon. So if it wasn't for the Russians, Reagan prosecutors think that Trump would have been done for. Fascinating. Back to the New Republic. It's entirely possible that Trump was never more than a convenient patsy for Russian oligarchs and mobsters, with his casinos and condos providing an easy pass-through for their illicit riches. At the very least, with his constant need for a new infusion of cash and his well-documented troubles with creditors, Trump made an easy mark for anyone looking to launder money. So there, Craig Unger is being way too generous with President Trump because he went bankrupt 6 times. He is an absolutely incompetent businessman. And in the midst of one of his bankruptcies that Unger explains in the longer piece, and by the way, we'll have a link to it in the description box, so you should read it for yourself, get all the evidence on it. He's in a world of trouble, and all of a sudden Russians come in and rush in and buy a bunch of apartments in the new building that he's building, and all of a sudden he's back to not in trouble. And so he might have gone under right then and there. Now you think he, as overall hundreds of Russians and dozens of them connected to Russian mobsters are buying up his properties, he's just, oh golly gee, I didn't know that was happening. Did the Russians come in and do that? Oh, I'm just an easy mark. Okay, that is an unlikely answer. The only way that he doesn't know is if he's the most clueless businessman in the world. Given how unintelligent he is, there is some chance of that, okay? But overall, you'll see here that there's just so much, there's a mountain of evidence connecting him. He knew what was going on. So now, if you're unconvinced by reporters saying it, well, let's go to one of the Trump family members, Donald Trump Jr. Back in 2008, of course, knucklehead that he is, he doesn't know that he's supposed to be covering this up. So he says, quote, Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. We see a lot of money pouring in from Russia. Oops. So if you're looking for a connection to Russian money, well, you don't have to trust me, just ask Don Trump Jr., because he said it in public. The other son also talked about how the golf courses that they own were also financed by the Russians. Oops, number two. All right, well, if they're just living in his towers and they're laundering money and maybe, golly gee, he doesn't know. But what if they're using his assets for it? What if it was already proven? In 2015, the Taj Mahal, owned by Trump, was fined $10 million, the highest penalty ever levied by the feds against the casino, and admitted to having, quote, willfully violated anti-money laundering regulations for years. So it's not a matter in dispute. They already admitted that they knew they willfully violated these provisions to launder money through Trump's Taj Mahal. Okay, the only way you can't see what's happening here is if you don't want to see what's happening. So now let's go to his other properties. Throughout the 1990s, untold millions from the former Soviet Union flowed into Trump's luxury developments and Atlantic City casinos. But all the money wasn't enough to save Trump from his own failings as a businessman. He owed $4 billion to more than 70 banks, with a mind-boggling $800 million of it personally guaranteed. He learned that lesson the hard way. Later, he stopped personally guaranteeing it because he realized, oh damn, I'm such a stupid business guy. If I guarantee it myself again, I'll bankrupt myself as well as all the businesses that I have bankrupted. But so he's in a hole here, he's in a lot of trouble. So what happens next? As Bloomberg Businessweek reported earlier this year, it wasn't long before 1/3 of the units on the new tower that Trump was building, the priciest floors, had been snatched up, either by individual buyers from the former Soviet Union or by limited liability companies connected to Russia. Now, if you're saying, hey, Cenk, that was back in the 1990s, what does that have to do with today? Remember, Trump keeps saying, I've never done business with Russia. I don't know what you're talking about, Russia. I don't have any connections to Russia. You've had connections with them for decades. And they saved your bacon when you needed it most, partly by buying up all those apartments. And if you're wondering, well, does his connection to Putin go back that far? One of the guys who turned evidence against the Russian mobsters said that their connection to Putin went back to 1994 and 95. So these two players have been at it for a long time. Now let's go to one of the Trump World Tower sales agents, Deborah Stotz. She said, we had big buyers from Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan. Funny how they all decided to launder their money. I mean, buy properties in that Trump Tower, wait, it winds up being in almost all the Trump properties. Trump had found his market, they explained. After Trump World Tower opened, Sotheby's International Realty teamed up with a Russian real estate company to make a big sales push for the property in Russia. The tower full of oligarchs, as Bloomberg called it, became a model for Trump's projects going forward. So now he's like, I got it, man. You just launder their money, you look aside, and they buy up these properties for me. They save my ass. It's a win-win for me. Maybe it's illegal to funnel that money out of Russia. Not my business, that's their business. Okay, by the way, if you do business with them, it actually is your business. Dolly Lenz, a New York real estate broker, told USA Today that she sold some 65 units in Trump World Tower to the Russians. A local broker told the Washington Post, look at all these different organizations that have reported on this throughout the years, that 1/3 of the 500 apartments he'd sold went to Russian speakers. So many bought Trump-branded apartments. In fact, the area became known as Little Moscow. Now, look guys, selling to Russian speakers, there's nothing wrong with that. And if it turned out that he sold to not 500, but 5,000 Russian speakers, but none of them had any connection to organized crime, and nobody had ever been busted for money laundering. Oh, of course, that's perfectly fine. It would be weird to discriminate against Russians. That's not the issue here. Hundreds sold to Russians, dozens of them connected to crime. Those are the ones that are just proven, and the ones that are being looked at by the feds, etc. Different stages of the investigations for those. So when you put those two together, you go, oh. But if you still say, no, it's all wild coincidence. Okay, hey, listen, man, have at it, Hoss. You just want to see no evil, hear no evil, that's your problem, not mine. So let's go to now Sunny Isles. That's in basically Miami Beach. That's another tower. This one Trump didn't build, but he put his name on it and got money out of it. According to a Reuters investigation, in March, at least 63 buyers with Russian addresses or passports spent $98 million on Trump's properties in South Florida. What's more, another 1/3 of the units, more than 700 in all, were bought by shadowy shell companies that conceal the true owners. You don't conceal the true owners if you're looking to do legitimate business. You do it when you need to move money in and out. And by the way, if you're wondering, how does this game work? And it's not just Russia that does it. There's a lot of folks from China and the Gulf that do it too, let alone all across the world. If you are crooked and you've gotten ill-gotten gains from your people in whichever country you live in, you got to get that money out because you don't want to get it stuck there when the next guy comes in, finds out how crooked you are, well then he could seize all your assets. But if you wash the money through America and you buy properties, then you go, what assets? What are you talking? No, I got nothing to do with that. I got all these legitimate things here in America. And so if you overpay, it doesn't even really matter because you're just trying to get the money out of the country. So now, again, there's credible reports about the Chinese doing this in LA, New York, etc., but they're not connected to Trump. The Russians are very, very, very clearly connected to Trump, and he'd have to be at best enormously oblivious, but the fact that they did it through Taj Mahal, the fact that his family admits that the money comes from Russia shows you he's not oblivious, he's part of this. So last October, an investigation by the Miami Herald found that at least 13 buyers in the Florida's complex have been the target of government investigations, either personally or through their companies, including, quote, members of a Russian-American organized crime group. So that's 13 guys that the feds are investigating in just one of his buildings. And that doesn't even include the shell companies. Two buyers in Sunny Isles, Anatoly Golubchik and Michael Saul, were convicted for taking part in a massive international gambling and money laundering syndicate that was run out of Trump Tower in New York. The ring, according to the FBI, was operating under the protection of the Russian mafia. So connected to two different Trump buildings, running it out of his towers. Trump Soho is now a new tower in New York. Trump Soho was the brainchild of two development companies, Bayrock Group LLC and Sapper Organization, run by a pair of wealthy folks that came in from the former Soviet Union who had done business with some of Russia's richest and most notorious oligarchs. Together, their firms made Trump an offer he couldn't refuse. The developers would finance and build Trump Soho themselves. In return for lending his name to the project, Trump would get 18% of the profits without putting up any of his own money. Now, that's a hell of a deal. A couple of guys from Russia come over and they go, don't worry, Donald, we put your name on it. You don't worry about who we sell to, okay? We give you 18%. Now, look, his name does have value. He can get a certain percentage for putting his name on. 18% is awfully high. Why is it high? Partly to look the other way. Now, if it turns out nobody in that tower did anything wrong, and the guys that he made the deals with didn't do anything wrong, you go, okay, well, maybe it sounds high to me, but okay, I guess it's 18% you get for the name. Good luck getting that deal if you're anyone but guys that you're dealing with here. Okay, so let's look into the guys who he did the deal with and see if anything's wrong. Buckle up. This is first about Tamer Sapper. You know, we told you about Sapper Organization. It's one of the two groups that he did this Trump Soho deal with. Well, Sapper, his big break came when he co-founded a company that sold high-tech electronics, according to the FBI. Sapper's partner in the firm was a, quote, member or associate of Ivankov's mob in Brighton Beach. No charges were ever filed, and Sapper denied having any mob ties. That's the FBI saying that it was a member or associate of the Russian mob. But no, Sapper says, oh, I never heard of the Russian mob. Why, what another coincidence, unbelievable. Yes, quite literally unbelievable. All right, Sapper says, it didn't happen. Everything was done in the most legitimate way. Okay, so that's one of the partners. The other guy, the other company was Bayrock. This sounds normal, let's find out about Bayrock. Bayrock and its deals quickly became mired in controversy. Of course they did. Forbes and other publications reported that the company was financed by a notoriously corrupt group of oligarchs known as the Trio. That sounds great. In 2010, Arif, who runs Bayrock, was arrested by Turkish prosecutors and charged with setting up a prostitution ring after he was found aboard a boat chartered by one of the Trio with 9 young women, 2 of whom were 16 years old. Well, Turkish authorities were shocked to find out that those 9 women did not want to talk to the authorities. If you're involved in a prostitution ring with the Russian mob, you're not very likely to talk. So he skates out of that one. Now let's go to more. There's a lawsuit filed against them. According to a lawsuit filed that same year by 2 former Bayrock executives. So these are guys who had inside knowledge of what happened at Bayrock. Arif started the firm backed by the oligarchs and money they stole from the Russian people. In addition, the suit alleges Bayrock was, quote, substantially and covertly mob-owned and operated. Another shocking coincidence for about the 108th time in a row that Trump did a deal with both sides being connected to Russian mobsters. Boy, golly geez, got some bad luck. More about Bayrock. The company's real purpose, the executives claim, was to develop hugely expensive properties bearing the Trump brand and then use the projects to launder money and evade taxes. Last year, after examining the title deeds, bank records, and court documents, the Financial Times concluded that Trump Soho had multiple ties to an alleged international money laundering network. Now, remind me again how there's no evidence connecting Trump and the Russians. If you just care to look a little bit, there's a mountain of evidence. What they turned that relationship into in 2016 is a different question. But anyone who tells you Trump is not connected to the Russians doesn't know one fact about this case. Okay, now, we haven't even gotten to the worst guy yet. Okay, during his collaboration with Bayrock, Trump also became close to the man who ran the firm's daily operations, a twice convicted felon with family ties to Semyon Mogilevich. I'm going to get back to Semyon in a second because he's the boss of bosses in the Russian mafia. But they're talking about Felix Sater in this case, who's connected to Semyon. So in 1998, Sater pleaded guilty to racketeering, operating a pump and dump stock fraud in partnership with alleged Russian mobsters that bilked investors of at least $40 million to avoid present time. Sater turned informer, but according to a lawsuit against Bayrock, he also resumed his old tricks. By 2003, the suit alleges Sater contributed to the majority of Bayrock's shares and proceeded to use the firm to launder hundreds of millions of dollars while skimming and extorting millions more. So I don't want you to get confused. That's not the same guy, that's 3 different guys from just the Trump Soho deal, which are different than the 13 guys the feds were investigating in the Sunny Isles deal, which are different than the dozens of guys some of whom were arrested and investigated in Trump Towers, Trump World Tower, and the list goes on. So when there's Tamir Sepper, Tevfik Arif, and Felix Sater in the Soho deal. So let's find out more about Sater and his connections to Trump, because one of the defenses they'll make is, oh, no. These guys are tangential. They have no direct connection to me. Okay, great. By Sater's account, in sworn testimony, he was very tight with Trump. He flew to Colorado with him, accompanied Donald Jr. and Ivanka on a trip to Moscow at Trump's invitation, and met with Trump's inner circle, quote, constantly. In Trump Tower, he often dropped by Trump's office to pitch business ideas. He said, quote, just me and him. When they asked Trump about this, well, the guy seems to know everything about you. You guys are constantly talking business. You did do business with him. You did a whole Trump Soho thing with him. He says, I don't know him very well, but I don't think he was connected to the mafia. No, wait. Which one is it? you don't know him very well, or he's not connected to the mafia. If you ask me about Jim Jablowski, is he connected to the mafia? I'd be like, I don't know Jim Jablowski. I wouldn't say I don't know Jim Jablowski, but I definitely know he's not connected to the mafia. Wouldn't that be an incredibly weird thing to say if you don't know the guy? I think maybe you know the guy a little bit, and you certainly know he is connected. Well, let's find out if he's connected or not. In 2010, Sater was even given an official Trump organization business card that read, Felix H. Sater, senior advisor to Donald Trump. Sater didn't make that up on his own. The Trump organization gave it to him. Trump's like, oh, Sater. So who's Sater? I don't know Sater, but he's definitely not guilty. He's definitely not guilty. I don't know Sater though. Here, Sater, have a card saying you're a senior advisor to me. There's no evidence connecting Trump to the Russians. Are you kidding me? There is an iceberg of evidence. Okay, now let's go to Unit 63A. This is in a different building now, okay? It's unbelievable. In addition, Unit 63A, a condo directly below one owned by Trump. So this is Trump Tower, it's directly underneath him. Served as the headquarters for a sophisticated money laundering scheme that moved an estimated $100 million out of the former Soviet Union through shell companies in Cyprus and into investments in the United States. The entire operation, prosecutors say, was working under the protection of Almazan Totkanov, whom the FBI identified as a top Russian vor, that is a made man, closely aligned with, oh, there he is again, Semyon Mogilevich. Sorry for the horrible pronunciations of the Russian names, but let's remember, by the way, they're running through shell companies in Cyprus. You wanna know who ran the Bank of Cyprus? Wilbur Ross, Commerce Secretary for Donald Trump. What an unbelievable coincidence. Yet another one. Sanctions against Russia affected mainly one company in America in a $500 billion deal, ExxonMobil. The CEO of ExxonMobil, oh, Rex Tillerson, the new Secretary of State. Rex Tillerson now says, well, if we're not lifting sanctions, I might leave. Gee, I wonder why Rex Tillerson was there. I can't quite figure it out. Okay, so it does come all the way to present day. By the way, if you're wondering who Mogilevich is, real quick, at the top of the sprawling criminal enterprise was Semyon Mogilevich. Beginning in the early 1980s, according to the FBI, the short, squat Ukrainian was the key money laundering contact for the Solzhenskaya Bratva, or Brotherhood, one of the richest criminal syndicates in the world. Trump is so dirty. His whole enterprise is built on this dirt. All right, so now let's go back to the final mobster that was mentioned there, Totkanov, okay? So they find out that he's doing illegal money laundering, he runs, and he's in the wind. In Unit 63A, they arrested everybody but the top guy there, and they can't find him. So for the next 7 months, the Russian crime boss fell off the radar of the Interpol, which had issued a red alert. Then in November 2013, he suddenly appeared live on international television. Sitting in the audience at the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow, Totkanov was in the VIP section, just a few seats away from the pageant owner, Donald Trump. What Russians? I don't know, what do you mean Russians? When they asked Trump about the Russians, he said, I tweeted out that I have no dealings with Russia. You have no dealings with Russia? He has all the dealings in the world with Russia. Read the New Republic piece. Go and read the links to all those other articles from Reuters, Financial Times, Bloomberg. There is all the evidence in the world that Trump and Russia have been doing business, and yes, very much illicit money laundering business for a long, long time. Now, whether they can prove that today will determine whether Donald Trump finishes his term, and whether it affected the 2016 election will be the critical question. But did he have dealings with Russia? Duh. Abso-freaking-lutely. If you like this clip of the Young Turks, you know there's a whole live 2-hour show, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern every day, and you can download it or stream it and watch it without ads if you become a member. tytnetwork.com/join.